So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindita, as you heard, and I serve at the UN Climate Change Secretariat. We are based in Bonn in Germany. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and thanks Mike and Inno's colleagues for having me here. Like so many of you, I guess, I am a huge sports fan and also a big outdoor fan. I enjoy hiking in the hills of Bonn, but also sports in general. I enjoy the fighting spirit and the pushing of limits and boundaries and the feeling of joy and inspiration, and just seeing how one develops, grows, and becomes a better and healthier individual through sports. I have two teenage girls, and I'm now a growing fan of rowing and tennis. Sports is a big part of their lives for our family and for this community, as it is for many throughout the world. What sport does really matters, but like so many fans, I am worried about the impacts of climate change in general and on the sports sector in particular. It's simple. The weather affects everything you do, ability to practice them outside, to host games. It impacts the health and safety of athletes, and let's be frank, it hampers the ability to make money. Jobs are attached. This is all just going to get worse if it's not dealt with, and that's why you're here today, to explore how the sector can be an integral part in our collective efforts to address climate change and sustainability related challenges, and also to keep action going and the momentum going on that front. I know there's a large community here of outdoor sports, and I congratulate you and the organizers for looking at how can your community maybe mobilize to have a more focused and positive impact on climate, building on positive stories already underway, as well as being helped by the pandemic to really refocus our needs to value health. I am now going to talk to you about IPCC, because it's very difficult to start a presentation on climate action without noting that, with each subsequent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are witnessing mainstream scientific consensus on the issue becoming stronger, the threat to humanity more severe, and the call to action more urgent. The latest IPCC report is a point in case, which told us again that it's crucially important that we go all in on climate action, collaborating across business and government. We need to act on climate now because the window of time to stabilize the climate is disappearing fast. And unless there's immediate and large-scale reductions, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees will be beyond our reach. Large-scale emission reductions will mean systemic shifts, so departure from business as usual. We must halve emissions by 2030 and achieve net zero as soon as possible in the 2040s. Among others, IPCC report also noted that changes in climate are already happening and becoming more intensifying. I believe this report was not news for any of you. Climate change is here, and it's no longer a faraway concern. In fact, just 20 kilometers away from where I live here in Germany, people have in July suffered the worst flooding ever known, exceeding previous level by up to 1/3, I think, finding towns totally unprepared for that kind of impact, and highlighting the reality that no one is really ready for impacts of climate change. So climate change continues to outpace us and our collective ability to get a handle on that. But we also still have an opportunity to change course if we seriously start acting today. And acting today means working hard and working together, helping and empowering each other, learning from each other, and holding each other accountable. In the UNFCCC processes, we've always been consistent in saying that governments alone cannot address the climate emergency. The IPCC has said this as well. Sustainable business and responsible leadership, all of these things are being now demanded by science, by public, by youth, and increasingly by regulators. So we should be consistently demanding this as well as citizens and as employees. But in this, we need to think about the role we play as individuals, the role we play as individuals that lead a certain lifestyle, and the choices that we make as citizens as well. We have been somehow conditioned to believe that when we adapt our lifestyle to help fight global warming, we will feel more limited. It might be less attractive and not so adventurous. But as citizens, we also need to think about personal changes that we can and should make which can help not only climate change, but also give us pleasure by taking the slow and sustainable approach to our lifestyle. So as well as just doing more sport and connecting with nature, we can also use our voice, use our knowledge, and help others adopt more sustainable business, more sustainable sport, more sustainable lifestyle. So congratulations again for having this discussion. Climate change needs governments, but also industries. We need the sports as well to respond to this with the same level of urgency. And we have recognized the role of sports even in 2018 as we brought them together to talk about what could sports industry do about climate, what are some of the opportunities and what are some of the challenges. And building on this, we designed UN Climate Change Sports for Climate Action Framework to give sports an opportunity to come together and do two things. One is to walk the talk, so to reduce environmental impact in line with what science is telling us. And two, for sports to use our microphones, to use our voice to inspire action amongst peers and global citizens. And whilst doing so, work in collaboration with peers to share ambition, lessons learned, and empower organizations which have less capacity to respond with the right tools and knowledge. Sports for Climate Action is not meant to provide a feel-good story. It's not meant to just look good on a press release. It's more about working with the sports sector to transform it, to make sure that climate change does not destroy it, because that's exactly what will happen if we don't start taking climate action more seriously and if we don't boost our collective efforts to respond to it. So to succeed in this journey, obviously it takes teamwork and it takes sports buy-in. And that's why we are deeply appreciative of our signatories for coming together, working together, and bringing their knowledge on the table. We convene about 4 different working groups where all these signatories come in and talk about, technical stuff. How do you measure your emissions? How do you reduce your emissions? How do you compensate for those that you cannot address? And I do not want to say that we are there yet, we aren't, but there's a lot of work going on to really ramp up those efforts and mobilize more of the actors to join us. Now, this convergence of the two, global crises, if you will, climate change and COVID-19 has opened this window of opportunity to not simply recover from this virus, but also to see how we can build forward, how we can build communities that are healthy and sustainable. We've seen that sports industry has undergone significant changes due to COVID-19. So they are already making transformational changes. What we need to do is to make sure that these changes that are made now are in line with goals of Paris Agreement and sustainable development goals. So what can sports organizations do? Reducing environmental impact is an important operational and business element for this sector. More efficient teams make more money. This is also better for the environment. We also recognize that there are a lot of heroes in the sports sector. People look up to their stars. And if the sector can collectively send strong signals and get the word out there about the need for immediate and greater climate action to the general public, this can, of course, help. But sports organizations can also display climate leadership by engaging actively and collectively in the climate neutrality journey, by also differentiating themselves from the others, building brand reputation, and so on. But Sports for Climate Action specifically then is looking at these two things. One, you walk the talk, you reduce emissions in line with what science is saying. And two, you use your microphone to communicate towards the global community about the need to really take on that individual kind of action. So sports impact on climate is very complex and too difficult to measure. I think nobody has done it before, so we don't know. And it's also difficult to address depending on geography or size of the organization. However, most sport organizations and fans would now acknowledge that sports contribution to climate change through associated travel, energy use, construction, catering, and so on is considerable. Moreover, sports global interest for billions of fans and the media coverage it generates in response provide a strong platform for the sports sector to play an exemplary role in meeting the challenges. So in Sports for Climate Action, we're focusing efforts on 5 areas. First principle, undertaking systemic efforts to promote greater environmental responsibility is really asking organizations to embed sustainability considerations in their business. What this means in practice: certainly, senior management and overall organization buy-in and commitment is a prerequisite for a successful climate strategy. Implementing climate targets is likely to necessitate changes in behavior and decision-making throughout the organization. In some cases, it also requires establishing an internal accountability and incentive system, providing adequate resources to achieve the target. And this is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, without senior management commitment. The second principle asks organizations to work on their climate neutral plans. What this means is they will need to first understand what their environmental footprint is. What are their operational and supply chain emissions, energy, travel, purchased goods and services, and identify ways to reduce them. Sports can also do a lot to influence the impact they cannot reduce today by demanding more sustainable products and services, by selecting suppliers that are walking the same path, that have commitments towards net zero and are becoming part of the solution. And the requirement that we have, or we are currently introducing now, is that when a sports organization commits to Sports for Climate Action framework, they will have 6 months to map their greenhouse gas emissions inventories. So they will have 6 months to really get that understanding. Within 12 months of signing, they will need to submit a plan on how are they going to achieve that. But at the same time, the expectation is that they start immediately with actions as soon as possible, regardless of whether their plans are ready or not. But they also need to report publicly on how they're doing on an annual basis, starting from this year. So basically, for climate, we need to halve emissions by 2030, as I mentioned, and achieve net zero in 2040. Most importantly, action needs to start immediately. And for credibility of commitments, it is important that progress is reported. The third objective of this of Sports for Climate Action is asking signatories to diffuse the lessons that they've learned, to share resources and tools and expertise, and collectively address potential knowledge gaps. We have seen that in sports, there is a significant knowledge gap when it comes to sustainability. So this principle is to really bridge that gap and empower organizations to understand climate change issues in a global and regionally relevant context, and incorporate lessons into those strategies. At the same time, there's a lot of education that can be tailored towards athletes, technical teams, and fans as well. The fourth principle is to adopt sustainable procurement policies to motivate providers to develop cleaner options, campaigns to be built to promote the use of greener, sustainable options. This also applies to giving preference to sustainable means of transport, being one of the major sources of GHG emissions in sports, thereby supporting a global transition to low carbon transport. And certainly the last principle talks about communication and advocacy for climate action. The immense global popularity of sports and its emotional attachment for fans creates a very significant opportunity for sports to engage people on climate issues. Activities led by teams and athletes have great scope to engage fans, but to date, implementation on climate action has been fairly limited. Sports are associated with rules, referees, clear demarcation of teams, and importantly, basic notions of what constitutes a fair play. And a key aspect of Sports for Climate Action is really to include all these fans and athletes into this conversation. And with the growing awareness that climate is changing and we all have a role to play, fans are getting used to sustainability-related themes. So this great unexploited potential for more direct engagement of fans in climate action must be leveraged. And this is what we're trying to achieve as well. There is a great work that's being done by some of the organizations to activate sport communities, plenty of them actually, but this could be scaled even further. We currently have 270 organizations involved that have signed on to Sports for Climate Action, and they range from governing bodies to federations, associations, teams, clubs, and so on. There's also some universities and some sports media involved. But what we've noticed is that not everybody's starting from the same starting line when it comes to having the right resources or knowledge, but we know that we all need to get to the same finish line. So the idea through these working groups is really to kind of help bridge that knowledge gap, as I mentioned before. The initiative as a whole was designed in a way to allow any sports organization to join, regardless of where they are in their environmental journey. And being part of the platform is really giving these sports organizations an opportunity to enhance and showcase their action, but also to identify solutions to some of the challenges that can only be addressed collectively. And, I think what I want to do now is just to say that Sports for Climate Action has been designed with sports included. We have asked them, what could work for you? And we have pointed them to the right direction when it comes to the level of ambition that we need to show externally and publicly. At the same time, we have encouraged them to take up some challenges that initially they didn't want to talk about. For example, setting concrete targets, reducing emissions by so and so by this much. And I think what I want to do now is also encourage this audience in particular to take up this challenge. I hope that we caught your ear and interest here, but I think it would be important to start thinking about how you want to take this next steps going forward. All organizations in the sector are needed to be part of the solution on climate, regardless what they do. And in this conference today, as you discuss and you hear various speakers, I encourage you to think about creating, such plans, providing frameworks that will not be super prescriptive, because each organization, will be different. But I think it's about providing that direction of travel of where we need to go is very important. And at the same time, trying to think about what could be some of the key foundations that you can collectively offer to outdoor sports community. Our system is built in a way to drive unsustainable practices. This needs to change if we are to win the fight against climate change. And to do that, really all hands are needed on the deck, and all voices are needed around the table. It's potentially not easy for everyone, but it's absolutely necessary. And it's also necessary for the future of sports. I think it's hard to imagine anyone who will want to do sport or compete in horrible weather conditions. And sports is more than just entertainment or recreation. And I think its decisions matter. We are convinced that sports will start to make the decisions necessary to build a green and healthy and more prosperous sector and future for all. We think at the UN Climate Change that if anyone can do this, sports can, and we will be there to support them along the way as well. So I will stop here. I thank you very much for your attention, and I am happy to answer any questions if you have them.